So every speaker's got a great story, and this one especially. So I'm going to bring up in a moment, and we should probably again flash this Slido so we can start accumulating Q&A. But I'm really excited to introduce Ryan Walls. Ryan, every one of the speakers has some role to play in building Temporal. And Ryan's role is in helping it be founded in the first place. So he gets credit for Temporal existing as a company, at least in part. And the story goes that Maxime and Samar were working on this, before it was a dedicated company as Cadence, as part of Uber. And they're thinking, should this be a company? I don't know. I mean, we do this for Uber, but I mean, who knows who else would want something like this, like what the point of it be. And one of the early Cadence users was Ryan. And I guess they saw some application he had built, which I believe was actually a desktop application, and they should have opened their eyes to like where else this could go and like how much broader this could really be. And that was kind of part of what was the push that made Max and Samar start the company. And later on, that story wound up in the Series A funding presentation. So it got us a nice chunk of change from Sequoia Capital too. So we have many debts to Ryan. And with that, I'd love to bring up Ryan Walls from Block.
Thanks so much. I'll take just 0.1%. It's fine. And thank you guys. Thanks for the introduction. Thanks, Jacob, for that awesome talk. I look forward to stealing a lot of those ideas at Square, which is, I think, a fair trade-off given how much money we send Datadog each month. So as they mentioned, I've had a long history with Temporal and Cadence. Introduced it at my startup back in, I think it was 2016. Samar, I think, said last night it was the first, we were the first to use it in production for our product. And really our success managing workflows was a key factor in getting acquired a couple years later. So now I work at Square. I work on developer experience. We have several thousand developers. As part of that, I am trying to kickstart Temporal adoption, from helping with the contract to getting teams to pilot Temporal to potentially proposing a team for 2023. And that's what I'm here to talk to you about today. Not specifically my push get Temporal at Square, but the process of adopting or pushing change, being a change catalyst, getting an idea from start to company-wide adoption. So who is this talk for? Well, transparently, it's for me. I've spent a large part of my career driving change and getting technology rolled out. It was a lot easier as a small startup. I just went and did it one weekend. And I've never sat down and wrote, okay, what are the steps that it takes to like get from here to a lot of people at the company are using it, like what Jacob's done at Datadog. And so who else is this talk for besides me? Well, let's start by summoning up your imaginative powers. I want you to imagine that you're at a tech conference and that you've just heard an awesome talk. Can you imagine it? Are you there? Okay. What are you going to do in this imaginative place that you just thought of when you get back to work? Tell your manager. I want you to think of it. You don't have to tell me. It's all right. You can keep it secret. But think, what are you going to do? All right, some things you might have thought of. I'm going to go in on Monday and I'm going to turn in my 2-week notice so that I can go work at Datadog with Jacob working on that cool thing because they've already got it adopted. So, my boss, if you're watching, I'm not planning that yet. You might have said, okay, I'm not going to do anything. This doesn't really solve our problem. We have other problems. I'm not going to do anything. You may go back and say, okay, I'm going to go to my immediate team, my manager, and this is really cool. We're going to try to use it on our next greenfield project. Or you may say, wow, this is awesome. I want to try to get company-wide adoption of this cool thing. And yeah, it would solve a lot of problems of ours. If you are in that last camp, and you're what I'll call an aspiring catalyst, then this talk is for you. In this talk, I'm going to outline basically 3 phases that you and I need to focus on each time we do these types of rollouts. We need to prepare to be a catalyst, we want to launch the change, and then we want to scale the impact. And for each phase, I'm going to give some concrete tips or ideas, things that have worked for me over my career, having rolled out somewhere around 15 plus technologies across companies. So let's start with preparing. Whether you've driven company-wide change before or not, it's hard every time. It's never easy. A friend of mine who's a senior director at SoFi, shout out to the SoFi people here, said the tech is the easy part. Getting funding, getting buy-in, that's really where the challenge is. So given how hard this can be, I wanted to talk just a few minutes about things you can do to prepare, things that I need to do to prepare each time we do this. First thing is getting the right mindset. And this is just going to help you in this bumpy journey. What's your motivation? It feels like a inspirational talk here today, but your motivation. It's commonly things like recognition, money, promotions, and those are great, and definitely want to go for those. But one thing that has helped me is if I remember, hey, what am I trying to do? And if I remember, I'm trying to help others, and I'm trying to grow myself. And if those are the motivations that drive me, then it's a lot easier to drive change. I can even given this talk today, it's a lot easier to prepare if I'm thinking, hey, I'm actually going to help people try to drive change at their company. The other one is, believing in yourself, and this one's hard because it seems like all of us up here on stage, or who have done this technology before, we must have it all together. We have something that you don't, and it's not true. We just spent a little time and dove deep on the tech, and I'm a big believer in this copy from Stack Overflow world, which I'm sure nobody's ever done, that we tend to be generalists because technology companies incentivize us to be generalists and deliver features. And so if you dive deep on a technology, spend a little time on it, you can actually outlearn the majority pretty quickly. So believe in yourself. Any one of you go back, you could be the expert of Temporal at your company. All right, so some concrete ideas of things that I feel I need to focus on when I do this type of thing. First one, avoid time traps. This is my personal kryptonite. People spend on average 4.8 hours a day on apps on their phones. It's super easy to do. A great book I recommend is Atomic Habits. If you've never read it, it's like the one book I recommend everybody read. Help you save time, like use time efficiently. My favorite personal life hack is I use a cell watch and then try to leave my phone other places, hide it from myself. The other one, read. And this one seems obvious, but like you guys are already doing this if you've come to a conference on a new tech. But like staying abreast of the tech that's coming, what's out there, that's going to help you prepare to be a change catalyst. Read the manual. Ask me a story. I have a story of how I first became a tech lead. I literally just read the Hibernate manual, and I was Like everybody's like, wow, how did you figure this out? And I was like, well, I went home this weekend. Yeah, so read the manual. Hone your craft. This one feels obvious, but like pair program with people. I'm a big believer in pair programming. I wouldn't be the programmer I am today if some senior people didn't pair with me early on. And as senior people, we get lazy and we need to pair with the younger people regularly. So it's a great thing to do. Do end-to-end projects, pair work if you're a product manager, pair work with another product manager. Write and speak. A lot of times it seems like people are just natural at this type of thing. It's like, oh, I couldn't do that. And the reality is it's a skill. And the only way that you get better at it is to practice. As many opportunities as you can, write things and talk. Volunteer to give a tech talk, volunteer to write up your product update. The reason is you're trying to influence and drive change. Almost always you're writing about it or you're talking about it. And so if you want to drive change at a company, those are the two biggest skills to practice. Know your customers. This is a big one. They mentioned the desktop app. It's a great story. I built this awesome cloud, Kubernetes, auto-scaling, rancher-based, most awesome thing in 2015, 2016. And then none of our customers would buy anything cloud-based. Nothing. So we shoehorned it into a desktop app. And so it's a great story. But the reality is we didn't know our customers. And so we tried to solve the problem as we would solve them instead of how our customers would solve them. And that's the best way to not get adoption of your thing, whatever it is you're trying to push at your company. So spend time with your customers. Do their job for a day is the best thing you can do. Watch them for a day, interview them. If you don't really understand them, you're gonna. We engineers, we have shiny rock syndrome. Like this is cool. Everybody's going to love this, but your customers may not care. So when and how do you do this? This is my kids, by the way. I had to throw in a cute picture of my kids. And shout out to my amazing wife who's watching them at home in Park City, Utah right now. So I have no time outside work. And so when do you do this type of thing? And I'm a big believer that as part of your career, whatever job you do, you should dedicate 10% of your time learning. 10%, at minimum. 10%, learning or growing yourself. And ideally, it's on things that are going to help your company, right? Like you're learning about Temporal. Hopefully, it's going to help your company. But I'm a big believer you should be doing this as part of your job. And the question is, okay, how? And in my mind, the key is you've got to partner with your manager. Like it's a partnership. Even if you're a manager, you have a manager, right? So you need to partner with who you report to. Your learning is going to help them be successful. And their job is to make the team successful. Right? So together, it's a symbiotic relationship. You're helping them by becoming a thought leader, learning more, knowing where the wins are going to be in a few months. And I love this quote from Atomic Habits, or I actually don't know if it's in the book, but James Clear did say this, who wrote it. In the long run, prioritization beats efficiency. I'm a big believer in that. Doesn't matter how hard you work, it's how smart you work and on the right things. And partnering with your manager, the key there is you need to establish a relationship. If you're not doing regular one-on-ones, ask to do regular one-on-ones. You need to develop that relationship because if they're not in your corner, it's going to be very hard to drive change. So this is one good line. I'll just concrete tip I use. I use this phrase in my one-on-ones almost constantly. It's like, hey, this week I've been spending a little time reading about whatever. And I'm really excited about it for this reason and this reason. And I think it's going to really help our team or our company because of this reason, or this reason. Okay, and so you haven't explicitly said, hey, manager, can I have 4 hours tomorrow to read? Like, you didn't explicitly say that. What you're doing is you're sharing like your journey of, hey, I'm reading, I'm learning, and here's how I think it'll help the company. All right, launching change. I'm going to have to go faster. You've worked on yourself, you're motivated, you have an ally in your manager, you know your customers and their problems, and now you're ready to kick off change. What do you need to do? Here's kind of a launch cycle that I like to use when I'm introducing change. There's several steps. At this slide, I just want you to think about the things in the middle that you should be doing all the time through this whole process, and that's listening to your customers, partnering with your manager, and developing relationship with the budget owner, because that's where the rubber meets the road. All right. By the way, I like this to be completed in 1 to 3 months. Speed is of the essence in this whole thing, and we'll get into speed, but if it takes you 4 years to roll out something, it may not be valuable at the end. Oops. So first step, get buy-in to invest. This is the relationship with your manager coming in to pay dividends here, right? You've ideally seeded the idea, your manager's excited, they know you're learning, they know the impact for the company, and so they're going to be willing to let you dedicate time to work on this. Solve a real problem. Again, this is knowing your customers. If you run into roadblocks, go up the stack and see if you can find a problem related to the problem you want to solve that the company has, that maybe your individual team doesn't have, but the company has, or your division or your director has, and tie the work you want to do to that broader problem. And try to keep the money low up front. The more you can do cheaply or free up front to show value, the better. All right, pick solutions. This could be an hour talk by itself, but I'll give a couple tips. Again, focused on the customer. I'm a big believer, pick 2. If you only pick 1 and get tunnel vision, you may, again, end up building the wrong thing. Don't build. I'll just say that up front. If you're going to try to roll out change company-wide, it shouldn't be something you built yourself from scratch. You're committing your company to maintain that, understand it, update it forever, even after you leave to go work with Jacob at Datadog. Learn from others. I reached out to Drew's team at Stripe. I was like, hey, what are you guys doing with Temporal? Like, what did you do to get going? And they were super helpful. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. There's teams who are doing what you're doing or wanting to do. And again, speed is like, pick products that will help you go faster. Speed is like the key thing for every technology company. You need to move faster. Inertia is like technical debt is coming for you. You need to be able to move fast. So pick products that will help you do that. Cultivate vendors. Create a good relationship with the vendors that you're looking at. If you don't create a good relationship, they're not going to be invested in your success. They're not going to give you a good deal. They're not going to be excited about working with your company. So really focus on this. There's a lot of details there. Talk to somebody in engineering if you're an engineer. And remember, if the buying sales experience is terrible, the production experience will be worse. All right, find early adopters. Jacob mentioned this. When you're trying to get something adopted, there's a whole diffusion of technology innovation theory that's like really old, 30 years, 40 years. They came up with this idea, the early adopters, the early majority, late majority, laggards of adoption, right? And the early adopters, around 10% of the people out there, are the ones you're looking for. You want them, the ones who are willing to try new things, they're not afraid of it, and they're going to be your champions and share their experiences in a positive way, right? And they're going to be okay if it breaks a little bit. Remember, if it's a bumpy road for your early adopters when you're trying to roll out change, it's going to be a really bumpier experience down the road, right? So try to make it good. Make your early adopters successful. Run proof of concepts. You need to get security sign-off, just key disclaimer for big companies out there, make sure they're on board. You want to do real production loads. Everything works in a demo. Every time it works, almost every time. I think Mike's thing may not have worked completely. Survey and interview users and watch them use the product. You want to see them, you want to use it yourself. Email into support, not as yourself. Because they're going to have flagged your name, like Brian Walls from SquareLog, contacts you. Call him personally, right? So email in as some random person. And then fail fast. This is the key. You got to be quick. If at any stage in this process it's not working, start over. Go with another product. Maybe you need to push through, but in general, if there's big red flags, you want to keep moving. All right. You've picked a solution. I gave a few tips on picking them. You've created a relationship with the vendor. You've proven value to early adopters, and ideally, you've already started a relationship with the budget decision maker. Now you're ready to scale. And there's a kind of a high level question like, why do you want to scale? Why not just solve it for my team? And again, it goes back to your motivation of I want to help it. I want to help the whole team, the whole company, my whole division be successful, right? I believe in this. I want to help others. That's why you try to scale. Here's the steps for 0 to company-wide in my plan. And the first thing is the contract. This is getting into nitty-gritty, but it's amazing how many times you end up asking working with vendors as an individual on the contract terms. I've probably signed 20 contracts. Key, you want support and training. You want them to be there for you. You want to make sure they're going to help you with the rollout. Ideally, it's explicit in there. I'm a big fan of 1-year contracts for new things. Your company needs to move fast. If something doesn't work, you need to move on. If you've signed a 3-year contract, you can't move on, or you eat the cost. If it's an established tech, 2 years. Financially, I'm a big fan of tiers. In other words, as you scale out the rollout, it gets cheaper for you per unit of usage. You want to get that upfront in the contract, because then it'll help you when you want to scale out. Your leaders will be like, yeah, great, it's going to be cheaper as we go, which isn't totally true, but it's less per usage, right? And you want the cost tied to usage so that the vendor's excited about you rolling out to more, right? If it's just a flat rate, they're not excited about supporting you rolling out to more people because it's just more strain on their infrastructure without any extra money coming in. So you actually want it to go up as you use it more. I'll get into I'll skip legal. It's a whole other conversation. But get legal involved early. It's a long pole. The why pitch. This is where the rubber meets the road. Again, another one that could be an hour-long talk. You need to have a pitch of why you should be doing this. And I'm a big believer it should be 2 parts. You should have an elevator pitch, your 60-second, here's why it's awesome. And then you should have a written 1 to 3 page pitch. We use the SPADE framework at Square. You can use any framework that you want. Make sure you can quantify the impact if possible. It's very hard for leaders to make decisions unless they can see numbers around, like, okay, at least how big's the problem? I may not know how much money we're going to save with the solution, but I at least need to know like how much problem we're trying to solve in dollars. You can definitely mention your longer term goals, but you should focus on like what are the near term wins. Oh, and by the way, if it was Temporal we were talking about, you could talk to Ryland and he would help you do this. All right, funding. This is one of the key things when you're negotiating a salary or a contract or anything with money in a company. Remember, it's not their money. When you go to your director and you're asking for $100,000, they're not pulling out their checkbook and writing a check for $100,000. And it becomes very emotional for people who are requesting, but to the manager, it's not emotional. It's just like, okay, do I get return on the investment, right? It's not their money. There's a few rules of thumbs about what's easier and what's harder. There seems to be a magic number around 100,000. Under that, you seem to be like much easier to get any size company for some reason, because we tend to be structured in smaller and smaller units, even as we're big companies. Anything 250 and $1 million and up is like you need budget, like VPs sign in, different things need to happen. Have a rollout plan. You want to make sure you only want to ask for the money you can efficiently use. So don't ask for $500,000 if you can only roll out to like 20 people this year, right? Because you're not going to spend it, and so now you've spent all that political capital on something you can't use. Be bold. Oh, I do want to mention constraints. If they give you less than you ask for, work with it. Like, give you $50,000. Okay, I'll go and like solve this one problem for this one team. We'll show value, and then I'll come back in 6 months. But be bold. I love this quote from a CEO I worked for at my last role. He's like, pulled me aside, said, ask for what you need to be successful. Because if you ask and we say no, then it's on us. But if you don't ask, it's on you. So it's always stuck with me. Of course, he didn't mention that also if you do ask and they say yes, it's still on you as well. All right, rollout. Partner with your vendor on this. You want to roll out, and is this 5 minutes till the 30-minute mark or until the Q&A is done? Till the 30-minute mark, okay. You want to partner with your vendor on the rollout. They've done this so many times, ideally. Like, you don't want to be trying to roll out something that's never been rolled out anywhere else. They've ideally done it before. They're going to help you. Early adopters solve a real problem. Agile is kind of a bad word these days, but like, there's a lot of value in saying impact a team at a time, so that if any point they say stop, you've already delivered value, right? Like, somebody's getting value out of your time. You didn't just waste the time. So deliver value and then increment from there. Expansion. I have this beautiful picture here because if you imagine today, I was like, hey, everybody's getting a new laptop today. And I bought them all and they're under this stage right here. And you in the back, you're getting yours in 5 years. It'd be like, well, like by the time he gets that laptop 5 years from now, it's not going to be that great of a laptop, right? Same thing for any new tech. Like, tech moves so fast. You've got to move fast, expand fast. Ideally, the quicker that you get to that last team, the more value they're still going to get from this new thing that you rolled out. We'll keep going. The follow-through. This is where most rollouts, I feel like, fail. Again, engineer mentality, and this is preaching to myself. I've done this more times than I care to admit. Here's this cool new thing. I got the funding. I was really persuasive. We got money. We paid for it. We pushed it out. The first 3 teams got it. We rolled it out a little bit more. Okay, everybody's on it, and then I went on to the next shiny thing. And now, like, everybody's like, well, how do I use it? Like, thanks for doing all that work, but I don't know what to do. Like, I can turn it on. I can do hello world. And so the follow through is so important to like gain credibility for your next rollout. You need to like give them documentation. You need to update it. You got to continue training, work it into your new engineer onboarding. Like, you got to embed it in the culture, or else it's like you wasted all the time up before then. All right, so let's review. That was a lot in a very short time. Remember, you and I should focus on these phases for every launch. Remember to grow yourself, stay positive, help others. Use at least 10% of your time on learning and growth. This is like my one life hack for software technology jobs. Like, do this every week. Aim for 4 hours, assuming you're working 40-hour weeks, which a lot of people in the pandemic maybe aren't still. Follow an evaluation process, but do it quickly, like 1 to 3 months, and then focus on scaling. You've determined this new thing is beneficial, like you did your research. Now, your goal should be, I want to help as many people as I can. All right, thanks for the time. I hope these help you in your next rollout.
Thank you, that was great. I just can't help but think of what sage advice said is there's so many times where I'll see engineers or architects that find their way to Temporal and they sort of like, I know I'm right about this. I know this is probably the answer. And then they sort of contemplate like how it's going to get taken up inside of the team they work on. And my experience is they eventually get there, but it could be, I've seen it take 6 weeks and I've seen it take 6 months. And I think you give a really excellent guide for how it doesn't need to be quite so painful once you've kind of made the decision to invest. So I think it's really helpful content. The first question from the audience was, if you're not building something yourself, how do you figure out which open source technologies to champion? Like, kind of where does your taste come from? And how do you know when you're onto something that's going to have a lot of impact for the teams you're working within?
Yep, good question. One, I try not to do open source first. I try to find some paid solution that I can somebody will support for me. Because even open source is wonderful. I'm a big believer in open source. I've done a lot of those too. You're still going to have to maintain it, update it. You might need to make changes to it. You may end up having to fork it depending on your use case. And now you've basically built it yourself, right? Once you forked it. So if you can find a vendor that will support you, that's number one. And then there's a lot of things going into how to pick a vendor. If you do fall back and okay, there's no vendor that does this, or I'm big enough that I can take an open source and run it internally. Engagement is big. I'm a big believer in. I'm less a believer in the features today and more about the ability to deliver in the future, right? So something may be smaller or less featureful, but if there's a lot of interest and it's growing fast, I prefer that over something that's kind of stagnated but got a lot of features.
Very cool. We had a bunch of more than a few requests for your slides. Are you? I know we're definitely doing recordings of these presentations, but are you also okay sharing the slides themselves?
Yes, I will post those. They're not public currently. I put it in the Square domain, and you apparently can't share those publicly, so I'll have to copy them and then I'll share them.
Okay.
I'm sure we'll get them on the website, maybe on the replay website.
So I'll make a standing request to all the speakers. We know we'll have recordings of these talks. I know you can get Max's as well, but just wanted to clarify that. Okay, and then, one question was this loop of new technologies you're introducing. How many of these are you running in parallel? Oh,
I forgot to mention that. It's actually in my notes. Try to do especially on a big thing, if it's going to be a company-wide adoption, it should be one thing, because we tend to, this is a flaw of our team, I'll put that on all of us on developer experience. We tend to try to run like 10 improvements at once, and it's hard to get any of them to the finish line without like really focusing. As an individual, if you're the only one working on this, should be one. You can evaluate, like I mentioned, have more than one thing you're evaluating. You should have two, and you should be learning about new things, preparing for your next thing, expecting this to fail and try something else. But one big evaluation going on is probably all you want to have going.
Good. I just love this question. I'm a young, starry-eyed engineer with chronic shiny rock syndrome. All of that sounded like great advice, but it feels like there's a gap between where I am and where you are. How do I practice doing things like, for example, finding and empathizing with customers?
It's a good question. One thing that will help is I've not been doing this for as long as it looks like I have, because I was a teacher in my first life. I was a high school math teacher, so I started at 30 basically and started from scratch. And so a lot of this was learning, spending the time learning was the key, and getting to know the customers was really just one. That's also a weakness for me still. But it's spending time with them, doing their job. The best thing I ever did was, at one company, we went and embedded with the customers for a day, literally helped them do what they were doing. And that informed decisions we made for the next 2 years. It was super valuable. And so it may appear oh, you've done this, you've done so much, you've gone so far, and reality is, spending the time learning, you can go really far in a short amount of time.
This one's kind of a tricky one, but I wanted, it's a good question, which is, how do you, what do you do, or how do you deal with the issue of if you find some technology and it is promising initially, but then you realize it's only good for a certain set of local problems, and then it's not something that's going to broaden out that much inside of an organization? How do you kind of avoid that gotcha?
Well, and sometimes that's okay. I mean, it depends on what your role is in the company. If your role is to solve that specific problem, and you realize it's not going to be a company-wide solution, that's okay. That can be your focus. If you're on a team, though, where you're trying to solve company-wide problems, like I'm on developer experience, the key is to try to find technologies that are already being used broadly at other companies, or ideally they've already been, these things have been done before, and you can say, oh, it worked for that group. You're not trying to do something that's never been done before, and so I think that helps you avoid those gotchas. And then the other thing is there's so much low-hanging fruit. I mean, Square, from the outside looking in, you're like, oh, they must have it all together. And it's well, we've got very obvious problems that are solved with obvious solutions right now, and we just got to roll it out. And so there's a lot of low-hanging fruit. Solve the mainstream 80% solution of the problem, and then if it's a 20%, the remaining 20% making it perfect, you probably don't even ever need to solve that, right? Because the 80% is always going to be degrading, and you need to just keep focusing on that mainstream problem. So that's, if you can focus on the core problems and use solutions that are already widely known, I think you're in a much better spot.
Awesome. And okay, so kind of two-part question to wrap this up. When my experience with a lot of times when a new platform gets introduced in a technical organization is that it gets typecast early on, that people make some kind of characterization, some analogy or heuristic or something that makes it familiar. And that may or may not be what you think it is. And I'm curious, first part of the question is, what's your experience with that, seeing a new technology adopted, what you think it is, and is it important to correct somebody else if their characterization's different than what you think is right, or are you just happy for someone to grok it at some level? and then the second part of the question is, for Square, what was your 60-second pitch for why they should adopt Temporal?
Good question. For the first part, well, let me skip to the 60-second pitch.
All right, let's do that first.
My 60-second pitch was basically we need reliability improvements, and so we need to find ways to manage our huge microservice architecture, and I see it as service orchestration as code is what Temporal is to me. And we need to be able to define how we do retries, define how we do cancellations, make sure things actually get done in a durable way. That's a summary of my pitch. Now, when people misunderstand technology, or you're saying misinterpret like the purpose of it.
Or like, I'll give you an example. Like, I've talked to some customers who've said, "Oh yeah, we know what Temporal's for. It's for async things." And then I talked to another organization, well, we know what Temporal's for. It's for any long-lived process that a human does. Yeah. And then someone else will call it orchestration. So there's all these different ways of framing it. They're usually at least partially right. Yeah. And the question is, how much do you care about leaving that alone? Or is it important as part of this adoption process that they be all the way right?
Yeah.
That's what they say.
I especially if it's a decision maker who's going to fund it, I try to make sure they have the right message. For adopters, I'm less worried about the people who haven't adopted it yet having a misconception of it, because eventually when we get to them, they'll adopt it and they'll know what it is, right? But if somebody who's deciding whether we take this thing on or not, or fund this thing, has a misunderstanding, then I definitely try to correct those. But in the end, there's often too many misconceptions to try to correct them all. You can try to get into people's hands sooner is my goal, and maybe less worried about what their initial impression is of the product.
Good advice. Thank you.
Yep, thank you.